The biblical creation story, featuring Adam and Eve as the first humans to ever have existed. Several people believe this story to be literally historically true, as if it actually happened. But I want to take us into the mythological background and let you decide at the end whether you think that it makes more sense. This is literal history or mythological symbolism. The story of Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible has several parallels and similarities with earlier Sumerian stories. Sumer was an ancient civilization in Mesopotamia, modern-day southern Iraq, that thrived around 4000 to 2000 BCE. Here are a couple of Sumerian stories that are often cited as influences on the Adam and Eve narrative. We've all heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an ancient Mesopotamian epic that predates the biblical account of Adam and Eve. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, a legendary king, and his search for immortality. In the epic, there's a character named Enkidu, who's created by the gods to be a wild man living in harmony with animals. Sound familiar? Enkidu is seduced by a temple prostitute and gains knowledge and civilization, similar to the way Adam and Eve acquire knowledge in the Garden of Eden. The other one is the Atrahasis epic. It's an ancient Mesopotamian myth that predates the biblical account of Adam and Eve. It describes the creation of humans by the gods and their subsequent disobedience, leading to a flood intended to wipe out humanity. In this myth, the gods create humans to be their servants and provide them with all their needs. However, the humans multiply and become too noisy. Disturbing the gods. This prompts the gods to send a flood of water to destroy humanity. But one man named Atrahasis is warned in a dream and builds an ark to save himself, his family, and animals. Little too much like Noah. The position that Adam and Eve are considered mythological figures rather than historical individuals is a consensus among scholarship. But there are several reasons it's a consensus, and why scholars lean interpreting Adam and Eve as mythological rather than literal historical figures. Here are some key points. Scientific understanding. Many scientific discoveries, such as evolutionary biology and paleontology, have provided evidence that conflicts with a literal interpretation of the biblical story of Adam and Eve. The theory of evolution suggests that humans evolved over a long period of time through natural selection, rather than being descended from a single pair of ancestors. There's also cultural contexts. Scholars often examine religious texts within their cultural and historical contexts. The story of Adam and Eve should be understood as a creation myth that emerged from ancient Near Eastern cultures, where similar myths and archetypes were prevalent. This suggestion that the story may have been shaped by the cultural and literary conventions of its time makes the most sense. Symbolic and allegorical interpretation. Several scholars argue that the story of Adam and Eve should be interpreted symbolically or allegorically rather than literally. They see it as a narrative meant to convey deeper truths, moral lessons, or theological concepts, rather than a historical account. In this view, Adam and Eve represent archetypal figures that symbolize universal human experiences, such as the fallibility of humanity or the relationship between humans and God. And then there's textual analysis. Critical analysis of the biblical text, such as examining its literary style and inconsistencies, can also lead scholars to question the historicity of Adam and Eve. They may find elements of symbolism, repetition, or variations in different accounts of creation within the Bible, which suggests that the story is more complex than a straightforward historical record. The Sumerian myths involving Ninhursag, Enki, and also known as Ea, and Ninti have been suggested as influences on the biblical story of Adam and Eve. While it may be difficult to establish direct causal relationships between all of these myths and the Bible, there are some very vivid parallels and shared motifs that scholars have identified. Here are a few points of comparison. Ninhursag and the creation of humans. In Sumerian mythology, Ninhursag is a prominent goddess associated with fertility, childbirth, and the creation of humanity. She's even sometimes depicted as the mother of all gods and humans. In some Sumerian texts, Ninhursag is involved in the creation of the first human beings from clay. This theme of humans being created from the earth or clay is also present in the biblical story of Adam, whose name is derived from the Hebrew word for earth or red earth. Enki, Ea, and the forbidden fruit. Enki, a god associated with wisdom, magic, and fresh water, plays a significant role in Sumerian mythology. In some versions of the myth, Enki is involved in providing knowledge and nourishment to humanity, including the gift of agriculture and the cultivation of fruits. The biblical story of Adam and Eve features a tree of knowledge from which they eat forbidden fruit that grants them knowledge of good and evil. This connection has led many scholars to propose a possible influence of Enki myth on the biblical narrative. Ninti and healing. Ninti is a Sumerian goddess associated with healing and life-giving. Her name literally means Lady of Life in Sumerian mythology. Ninti is depicted as healing various ailments and relieving suffering. There is a linguistic connection between the name Ninti and the Hebrew word for woman, Isha, which is derived from the Hebrew root word meaning life. Some scholars have speculated that this linguistic connection might suggest an influence on the naming of Eve, who is described as the mother of all living in the Bible. Here's some interesting similarities that have led some scholars to propose the influence of the Sumerian goddess Ninti on the character of Eve. Ninti, a prominent figure in Sumerian mythology, is associated with life-giving and maternal qualities, making her a potential source of inspiration for the biblical concept of Eve as the mother of all living. Ninti, whose name translates to Lady of Life, is often depicted as a goddess of healing and fertility. Her role as life-giver and nurturer aligns with the biblical portrayal of Eve as the mother of humanity. The association of Ninti with life and her title as the Lady of Life suggests her role in sustaining and propagating existence, reflecting an underlying motif that resonates with the concept of Eve's significance as the progenitor of all humankind. Furthermore, an intriguing linguistic connection between Ninti and the Hebrew word for rib adds an interesting layer of interpretation. You see, in the Sumerian language, the word T has been suggested to mean rib, and Ninti's epithet, Lady of the Rib, could be seen as a playful pun. This linguistic link may have influenced the later biblical narrative of Eve being created from Adam's rib. The association between the rib and the creation of a female figure may have been influenced by the symbolic significance of Ninti's title, possibly serving as a basis for the biblical depiction of Eve's origins. These parallels between Ninti and Eve are intriguing, and the potential influence of Ninti on the portrayal of Eve offers an intriguing avenue for exploring the cross-cultural connections and shared themes in ancient Near Eastern mythology. You know, Adam and Eve, the iconic duo of biblical lore, bear names, their names that pack a punch of thematic significance, making it abundantly clear they're more than just quote-unquote historical figures. Adam, derived from the Hebrew word for earth or ground, immediately grounds us in the metaphorical realm. His name serves as a gentle reminder that he represents the quintessential human, intimately connected to the earthly realm from which he supposedly emerged. On the other hand, we have Eve, whose name derives from the Hebrew word for life. Talk about a self-explanatory moniker. By being named life, she epitomizes the vibrant force that animates existence. It's as if the authors of the tale cheekily wink at us, letting us know that these characters are larger-than-life archetypes, personifications of profound ideas rather than flesh-and-blood individuals plucked from history's tapestry. With names so laden with thematic significance, it becomes crystal clear that Adam and Eve belong to the realm of mythology and symbol rather than the realm of historical record. When explaining the potential Sumerian influences, such as the goddess Ninti, the Lady of Life, and the nuanced connections between rib and creation, it becomes clear that the story of Adam and Eve draws upon pre-existing mythological motifs. These intertextual connections further support the view that the biblical narrative is not meant to be read as a literal historical account. While some individuals may desperately cling to a literal interpretation of the Adam and Eve story, it is important to approach religious text with a nuanced understanding that incorporates cultural, historical, and literary contexts, recognizing the symbolic and mythological dimensions of the Adam and Eve narrative, allowing for a richer and more nuanced interpretation, highlighting its enduring relevance as a timeless exploration of human existence, morality, and our relationship with the natural world. I want to highlight, along with the mythological, this mischievous serpent in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. It's a character that has puzzled scholars and theologians for ages. While there may not be a direct one-to-one correspondence, the influence of the Mesopotamian figure Ningishzida on this cunning creature is worth exploring. Ningishzida, with this divine serpentine, attributes and association with knowledge and fertility, saunters into the spotlight as a potential muse for the biblical serpent. Just as Ninhursag guards the sacred tree of life, the serpent in Genesis becomes the sly custodian of the forbidden tree, tantalizing Adam and Eve with the allure of divine wisdom. Perhaps the biblical authors, with a touch of poetic license and a nod to Mesopotamian mythology, wove Ninhursag's symbolic role as a bringer of knowledge and temptation into their own story of human fallibility. So let us tip our hats to the influence of Ninhursag, the slithering inspiration behind the serpent's cunning charm in the Garden of Eden, reminding us that even in the realm of myth and theology, serpents hold a special place in the tapestry of human imagination. The Adam and Eve story in the Bible has intriguing connections to several mythological motifs and ancient Near Eastern narratives, suggesting that mythological origins and influences are there. While the precise origins and influences are subject to scholarly debate and interpretation, several mythological elements can be identified. Another potential mythological influence is the Mesopotamian creation myths, as we highlighted at the beginning. The Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic, for example. They share common themes with the Adam and Eve story, such as the creation of humanity, the forming of humans from clay or earth, and the existence of a sacred garden or paradise. These motifs suggest a shared cultural and mythological background in the ancient Near East. The Sumerian myth of Enki and Ninhursag, as well as the sacred marriage narrative, involves themes of divine creation, the birth of humanity, and the conferral of knowledge and wisdom. The parallels between these Sumerian myths and aspects of the Adam and Eve story, such as the creation of humans and the presence of forbidden knowledge, indicate a strong presence of mythological connection. We also have Canaanite and Phoenician mythologies, which may provide additional mythological context for understanding the Adam and Eve story. The relationship between the chief god El and his consort Asherah in the Canaanite mythology has been compared to the biblical portrayal of Adam and Eve as the first couple. The presence of divine beings, creation accounts, and moral lessons in these mythologies further highlight the mythological origins and influences that may have shaped the biblical narrative. It is important to approach these mythological connections with care, recognizing that the Adam and Eve story is a distinct narrative within the Hebrew Bible. The biblical authors likely drew upon and reinterpreted existing mythological motifs within their own religious and theological framework, adapting them to convey their unique message about the nature of humanity, morality, and our relationship with the divine. By exploring these mythological origins and influences, we gain insights into the broader cultural and religious context in which the Adam and Eve story emerge. It underscores the rich tapestry of ancient Near Eastern mythologies and the ways in which they shaped and influenced biblical narratives, contributing to the ongoing scholarly exploration of the interplay between myth and theology in ancient texts. You could stand assured, we're dealing with mythology.